75 years after Bryan Cox flew a Kittyhawk in World War II, as part of his training to fly Corsairs in the Pacific. He was invited to be part of a Warbirds formation flypast over the cenotaph at the Auckland War Memorial Museum.
We have our red, and that'll be our formation as we go over the cenotaph.
He's taking to the skies in a P-40 Kittyhawk, an aircraft he's spent many hours in.
Quite nostalgic, except that I was more used to sitting in the front seat than the rear seat.
Having initially trained on Tiger Moths and Harvards, a dual-seater was not an option when Bryan first flew the Kittyhawk at RNZAF base Ohakia on the 3rd of August 1944.
We never had any dual training in any fighter aircraft. It was straight off, first flight was solo. The P-40 wing has 5 spars across, and that's more than most aircraft have, so they're very strong, very responsive to control movements, and very aerobatic aeroplane. I didn't expect that much, no.
No, nor did I. Have you got your wallet? I've got to fill it up.
After completing his training on Kittyhawks, Bryan did a conversion to Corsairs in preparation for flying them in action in the Pacific.
And that was a big jump because the Kittyhawk had 1,100 horsepower motor and the Corsair had 2,200, and twice the power of the Kittyhawk. But it could carry about 4 times the bomb load, and it did 417 miles an hour, whereas the P-40 would do 360. I would consider a P-40 like a Porsche, but a Corsair like a Rolls-Royce. It had to have a very big propeller. When you get the tail up on takeoff, that would nearly hit the ground. So they bent the wings down to shorten the undercarriage system to make them strong enough to land on an aircraft carrier where they thump down on the deck. So Americans call it the bent bird.
These planes have already been flown by US pilots. Now New Zealand pilots are taking them over and taking them up against Japan.
The Pacific Theatre in World War II saw New Zealanders serving alongside the Americans and Australians to repel the Japanese advance through the islands.
Until we had to do this from 1942 onwards, the RNZAF was producing as many crews as we could to go and fight in Europe. Then the war comes to us in the Pacific, and suddenly the RNZAF is having to run its own combat operations in our own region.
And you boys with bombs, hit the bridges, striking targets of opportunity.
I was at Green Island, a New Zealand base 150 miles east of Rabaul, where there was 100,000 Japanese. Our first job there was to stop them using their aircraft. So that's 8 Corsairs all day flying over Rabaul. We did a 4-hour flight. It took about 45 minutes flying each way, and then 2.5 hours on target or overhead. And we flew at 6,000 feet. We were instructed never fly straight for more than 20 seconds because it took 20 seconds for the Japanese gunners to wind a few handles and work out where to aim. And so at every 20 seconds for 2.5 hours, we flew as if we were drunk. And as long as we did that, they wouldn't shoot. Black Monday was the 15th of January, 1944. It was my 20th birthday, lying on a raft in the lagoon because I had the day off. My parents had just heard that my brother, his crew and himself's bodies had been discovered by the Red Cross, and so I was worrying about my parents. And then when I went back for lunch, I heard about the fact that a pilot had been shot down in the morning on a bombing raid on Rabaul. It wasn't long before they decided that I should fly in an attempt to rescue Frank Keith in Rabaul Harbour. And he was about 1 kilometre offshore of 100,000 Japanese. He couldn't use his life raft because there was a bright colour. They got the natives at Green Island to make bamboo rafts would float low in the water. And they put that into a Ventura bomber. The idea of the raft drop was to give the pilot a raft that the Japs couldn't see in the daytime, but he could paddle out towards the harbour entrance during the night. Once he got outside the harbour, Catalina could land and pick him up then. So it was just Paul Green and myself, my CO, and I was on his right wing. Grev Randall, the third one, he went up to 10,000 feet as a radio link to Green Island because VHF radio is sort of a line of sight. With the Ventura, they sent 12 more Corsairs, and that made 15 of us. The 12 Corsairs that came along with it, they strafed the Japanese waterfront with their guns to stop them shooting us down. I followed the Ventura around the back of a volcano and then back to where we knew Frank Keefe was swimming. And I saw that the rafts dropped right beside Frank. We had no option but to leave him and head back to Green Island.
He was flying back to the tiny coral atoll from Rabaul when his formation of 15 Corsairs was separated in a huge storm, turning day to night.
In the darkness, I was feeling around to try and find one switch out of 20, which was cockpit lighting, and instead of turning it on, I turned my own battery switch off. So I had no electrics, couldn't see anything. I had no idea where I was, no one else had any idea where I was, and I had about 20 minutes of fuel left. But I couldn't ditch in the water because I couldn't see the water, it was pitch black. And if I bailed out, I thought my parachute will drop all over the top of me and I'll get all tangled up in the dark, in the water, kind of wearing boots as well, and the sharks will eat me. I didn't have many options. I started to think, what will my parents do now, because I'll never see them again.
The wild tropical weather was about to throw him a life-saving moment of clarity.
I was conjecturing whether to bail out or even shut my eyes and just let it happen when there was a flash of lightning and had trees directly below me. That was Green Island. Now I was flying at 4 miles a minute, and I mean a minute earlier and a minute later I wouldn't have seen it because Green Island was only 4 miles across. I managed to land and taxied in. I didn't know what had happened to anyone else, and a big crowd, about 20 or 30 people, came around my aircraft saying, take it easy, and I didn't know why. It was because they knew by radio that a number of planes had crashed. Out of the 15 of us that left Rabaul, only 8 of us landed. The other 7 crashed. The night of Black Monday, which I survived, I was very conscious about if I didn't survive, how my parents would have been affected. I sat on my stretcher and wrote a letter to my parents. You can't say what you're doing in wartime. Everything's censored. So I told my parents that I'd been playing cricket. The catalyst from my first book was to remember the 8 pilots lost on my birthday.
7 who crashed on the mission to save Frank, and Frank himself. He was captured by the Japanese and died as a prisoner of war 15 days later.
During the war, the RNZAF trained 13,400 aircrew, and of those, 4,300 were killed. And it works out exactly 33.5%. In other words, 1 in 3 who trained during the war in the Air Force was killed, which is a higher percentage than the Army or the Navy. So out of 5 in my family, like my brother, myself and 3 cousins, I'm the only one out of the 5 to survive the war. I don't put it down to anything in particular apart from good luck. I'm sure it wasn't ordained or anything like that, although I was pretty lucky. Basically, I'm here because of a flash of lightning.